Welcome to Mental Makeover Radio, your go-to destination for meaningful conversations about mental health. I'm your host and your trusted therapist bestie, Cecilia Manella. Join us as we explore the complexities and messiness of human experience by addressing your questions and concerns. I'm here to provide a straightforward and practical therapy advice. So grab your favorite beverage, whether it's tea, coffee, or whatever tickles your taste buds, and get ready to embark on a mental makeover. Hello and welcome to Mental Makeover Radio. I'm so glad you're here and that you're tuning in today. We are talking all things attachment today, and we're going in with Michelle's question. So Michelle writes the podcast and says, could you talk about a relationship attachment styles and techniques for anxious or avoidant attachments? She identifies herself as a 40-year-old woman in her long-term relationship. So we're just going to dive into this. So thanks, Michelle, for your question. I am really excited to dive into different attachment styles and how it shows up in relationships. And maybe I'm a little bit of a nerd about this. So I'm going to nerd out quite a bit actually in this episode, because attachment really defines all of our relationships. So much of why we pick the partners that we pick and the relationships that we end up with and the challenges that we have in relationships all really come down to attachment styles. And I really wish we talked more about this. I wish they would teach us in school, because I think it would be a very valuable thing to be learning, but they don't. So we're going to dive into it today. And I'm going to nerd out just a little bit with you, but trust the process. I'm going to guide you through understanding what attachment styles are, what they are, how does it show up in your life, the influence it has on relationships, and then we're going to talk about some techniques to help navigate some of those challenges. Because, there's always a silver lining in all of this, and everything kind of happens in the way that it needs to happen in relationships. And so much about this process is learning about yourself first, and then diving into learning about other people. Now, this shows up in all relationships. This isn't just about intimate relationships. This is about parenting and friendships and coworkers. All the relationships that we have, attachment shows up for it. So we are going to start off with some history around the research around this, because we need to know where it came from first. So the attachment theory is really credited to one person in particular, Dr. John Bowlby. And he really created and developed the idea of attachment theory. Now, a theory in general is just a way that we try to understand the world. It's a set of explanations of how we see things. So there are different theoretical approaches to everything. And this one is really specific around attachment. So he's a psychologist who trained in psychoanalysis. Okay, so that's like really rooted in Freudian kind of way. So good old Freud was there. And you're right if you think about Freud and have this image of someone lying on the couch while the psychoanalyst is sitting behind them taking notes and analyzing everything they say. And usually in the movies, it shows that they're talking about their mother in some sort of way. So that's the image you get about Freud. You've hit the nail on the head. So Bowlby kind of trained in that way and found that he wasn't really satisfied with the focus only being on individuals' internal world, and that there wasn't really any thought or analysis around the influence of the environment around human development. So he was trained in this Freudian approach, and he found it kind of lacking, which is really great because it's quite lacking. He ended up working in child psychology area. And this is where he started to notice the difference between behaviors of children. And it started really with 2 kids, which is really fascinating. This is how things kind of come to fruition and creativity flows, is when you notice the difference between certain things. And he noticed that between these 2 children he was working with, one was quite distant and emotionless with him, and while the other was constantly at his side and wanted proximity. And this really catapulted him into researching the mother-child relationship and separation issues. So attachment theory is based on the concept that that attachment bonds are innate, which means that it's what we do as humans. It isn't a choice. It isn't like this idea that we choose it or we have a lot of power of it, in the sense that we are just innately built this way. We all want secure attachment bonds. And if we don't have those needs met as an infant, then the infant feels threatened and reacts in that way. So you notice this in children who, they're crying or calling out for their caregiver. That is a feeling of that attachment bond being slightly threatened. If that bond isn't met in a stable environment, meaning like if it isn't met over and over and over again, or if it's inconsistent, then there's some impacts on social, emotional, and sometimes cognitive level around development. So what does this all mean? It all means that we are created to be socially bonded, and this is a need in this bond. This isn't optional. It's really in our genetic makeup. Belonging is an essential human need. Just as much as we need water and air to survive, belonging is essential to who we are. So this is a really important thing to understand, that we all have an attachment style, and it's rooted in our need to be bonded to another person or to other people in general, like our community. Okay. I want to make sure that I make something very, very clear as we dive into this. And this isn't about mother blaming. Now, we can easily go into blaming moms for attachment issues. And then that's really what happened early on, to be honest. When this was being researched in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there's a lot of mom blaming. And women are expected to be the nurturers and caregivers. So culturally, we've blamed moms for pretty much anything that goes wrong. And in fact, Freud, who's kind of the grandfather of psychology, really leaned heavily into blaming women. And that was what was really problematic with his approach. We know that attachment needs can be met by any caregiver, and we need multiple adults in our lives as infants to meet our attachment needs. So I want to make sure when I'm talking about this, you're not thinking I'm talking about somehow moms are dropping the ball, because this is not on moms. This is on all adults and all of our experiences with adults in our lives when we're infants. Also, we can develop attachment injuries without large traumatic events. We often assume that something really bad has to happen for someone to have an attachment wound, but that's just simply not true. It doesn't have to exist within big T trauma, so to speak, and it can happen in smaller instances, or smaller instances when your needs are not being met as a child, or high expectations put on you as a child. And you'll find that as you kind of dive into the different attachment styles. Now, it can be as simple as having one need met, like not being met as a child, to create an attachment wound. So it can take one instance of having one need not met over and over again. And I want to add to that, it's not always in childhood. We often think that it just comes from like when we're really little and that's about it. But the truth is that we can carry attachment wounds in adulthood, from abusive relationships, from being cheated on, divorce, betrayal, lying. All those things, anything that happens in a relationship can impact attachment styles. And also, it's not just intimate relationships. It can happen in friendships. So where there's lots of rejection in a friendship, or there's lying in a friendship, there's lots of things that can contribute to attachment wounding. So we want to look at this as a large scope around how you, me, every single other human interacts with the world, and how they interact with relationships in their world, and how they relate to other people. So John Bowlby is, kind of the creator, I guess, or gets all the kudos for attachment theory. However, there was a psychologist that furthered his development that doesn't get mentioned very often, and her name is Dr. Mary Ainsworth, who doesn't always get the credit that she deserves, which is not uncommon in the world of psychology and research, where women's research doesn't really get a lot of credit, and we typically kind of default to the men, and those are the ones that get written a lot about. But Mary Ainsworth furthered Bowlby's research by introducing the concept of a secure base, or dependence. And dependence isn't in the frame of codependence. It's not that it's negative. It's this interdependence that we have in relationships. And she described it as a safe place to return to after exploring the world. So she is most credited with researching children's reactions to their mothers. So she ran this research experiment where she would have mothers and their infant in a room together, and they would be playing. And then the mother would leave, and then she would come back, and then the child would have a certain reaction. And then she was the one that used this research to distinguish 4 main attachment styles. So secure attachment, anxious, or somewhat we call it resistant attachment, avoidant, and disorganized. So that comes from all the research from Mary Ainsworth. She's the one that kind of took it to the next level, and introduced these descriptors around what this attachment style actually looks like and focused in on children. So we're going to dive into these 4 different attachment styles. We're going to break them down. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about yourself in this. Find yourself in the descriptors. See if there's like anything that aligns with you. And perhaps you can kind of think about other people in your life and maybe where they fall into these different descriptors. Now, these are generalized descriptions. They're not kind of hard and fast rules. And if you're looking to find out what your attachment style actually is, there's tons of free online quizzes that you can take so you can dive a little bit deeper into this topic. At the end of this podcast, I will give you some book recommendations, and I will have links in the show notes for you. So let's dive into secure attachment. Okay. So these are, it's the everybody wants to be securely attached because life seems just a little bit easier for people who are securely attached. Let's just be real. And these are people who typically trust really easy. They're really attuned to their own emotions and can easily attune to other people's emotions. They're really comfortable with intimacy and can easily communicate their thoughts and feelings. They handle conflict fairly calmly. They feel comfortable both in relationships and being on their own. So when they have times of solitude, they feel fairly well. They're able to see their thoughts and separate them from their feelings, and they can maintain a balanced sense of self and their confidence. Okay. So you can see why these, the securely attached people are like the end all and be all in the attachment world. Now we move on to the anxious attached, okay, or a bit resistant attachment. So these are people that have a very extra sensitive nervous system. And so what does that mean? It means that they can struggle with hyperactivation of emotions, which means their emotions are really heightened. Or they can be hypervigilant, that something's always going to go wrong. So they're always anticipating like the shit's going to hit the fan or things are going to go sideways. Their fear is really rooted in being abandoned by loved ones. So the fear of abandonment is really, really strong in those with an anxious attachment style. They can have a positive view of other people, but they tend to have a negative view of themselves. And they put a lot of effort into relationships, almost to the point of self-sacrificing. And they really struggle to receive criticism or any kind of perceived rejection. They're very hyper aware of the potential of rejection. Okay. Now, the third one is avoidant. So the avoidant attachment style are people that tend to downplay or dismiss emotions. They're typically highly independent and really self-reliant. Their greatest fear is intimacy and vulnerability. That is their number one fear, is feeling exposed and feeling really vulnerable. They have difficult asking for help or even admitting that they have help, they need help, or that they have any needs to begin with. They're really self-reliant. They have a positive view of themselves, yet a little bit of a negative or critical view of others. And what they're known for in relationships, really, this is like your tell-all, is they maintain or they can kind of work towards increasing distance when other people try to really connect with them emotionally. So when someone tries to get close to them, they typically push away, pull away, or create reasons to create that distance. And that's kind of what the avoidant person is like in a relationship. And the fourth one is disorganized. So disorganized attachment style. And we see this mostly with people who've experienced childhood trauma and abuse. So we're talking like big T trauma, right? Where there's something big has happened. So big T trauma is like spelling it out with a big T, and little T trauma is, we call those a little bit smaller versions of trauma. They have a hard time trusting other people. They feel really inconsistent and unpredictable in their behavior and their emotions. They go between avoidant and anxious behaviors really, really quickly. And in different relationships, they behave very differently. And they really struggle with intimacy and building trust in other people. Okay. So those are your 4 attachment styles. And have you found yourself in there? I'm sure you have. And I'm sure you found your partner or your sister, your brother, your mother, or somebody else in there. And I'm glad that you did, because this is going to make a difference. Knowing attachment styles matter. Because when you can see see them through their attachment style, It helps you see the dynamic of that relationship. And when you can see the dynamic of that relationship, then you can change how you navigate connection and navigate conflict with this person. It's not personal. And this is how they connect to the world around them. And so what I really want you to take away from this episode is that attachment styles are not personal. It's if there's conflict in a relationship, it's not because someone's trying to get out to get you or hurt you or reject you or abandon you. This is something that's happening within them, and this is how they relate to the world. Now, secure attached people make up about 50% of the population. That's what the research says. And the other 50% are a mix of the rest of the three. So just based on numbers, probability alone is that you have a mix of different attachment styles of people in your life in different types of relationship. Now, the biggest question that I get asked all the time in my counseling practice is, can we change our attachment styles? And the answer is yes, which is amazing. So when attachment theory first came out with Bowlby many, many moons ago, there was this idea that they were fixed. And Dr. Sue Johnson, who is actually from the Vancouver area, did a lot of research in the 70s and 80s, and she discovered that attachment styles can actually be changed, which is amazing. So Dr. Sue Johnson wrote a book, Hold Me Tight, and she argues that our attachment styles can change in different relationships. And she is the guru of attachment and relationships, especially intimate partner relationships. So getting back to Michelle's questions about techniques for anxious and avoidant attachment styles and relationships, I hope you can see that it's no surprise that the anxious and the avoidant styles are very much drawn to each other. That it is often that we see portrayed in rom-coms. This is what we see in the movies, is this game of, come closer and then go away. It's the dating chasing game that we see. It's the guy who isn't really ready for commitment, and she's anxiously waiting for him to pick her. So we're bombarded with these attachment styles, and we're told that this is what really love is. Why is that? Why are we sold the anxious and avoidant attachment style as what love actually is? And the answer is really kind of simple and boring, is because secure love is actually really boring. It's not a roller coaster ride. There's really no guessing on where you stand. Communication's fairly clear, and people are willing to be vulnerable. And if we're being really honest, that doesn't really sell books or movies or any kind of entertainment. So my first tip and technique around anxious and avoidant attachment is to shift mindset towards a boring, secure love. Challenge the notion that the big fight and the makeup cycle isn't really what love is about. That's like an attachment pattern. And it's an attachment conflict style that reinforces each other's fear in a relationship. And this is why it's really typical. So secure love is actually really boring. And some of that is we have to shift our mindset into what love actually really is. So this is what that anxious and avoidant dynamic looks like. So let's say there's a conflict in a relationship. There's a disagreement. And I know this is going to resonate with so many people. So the anxious partner wants to be heard and will pursue the avoidant partner. The avoidant partner then feels really overwhelmed by the emotions of their anxious partner and begins to retreat a little bit. And so this can look like not listening, using their phone to check out, or not give them any kind of attention or avoid eye contact. So this feels like abandonment to the anxious partner. So they increase the intensity of that emotion to try and get more reassurance from the partner. The avoidant partner then feels smothered and fears losing themselves. So in this relationship, so they withdraw even more and they want to leave and they want to run away. So when they do shut things down and walk away, they feel like they're saving themselves, while the anxious partner is flooded with fear of abandonment and will pursue or run after that partner. So this is the cycle of anxious and avoidant partner loop. The coming back together restores the hurt. And there's a bit of a honeymoon, phase and feeling attached to that, which we equate to love and security and connection. But both people are then fearful of it happening again and don't know how to end that cycle. So the goal is to not engage in that cycle. And it's to shift our mindset to some boring love and boring connection. So, which leads into my second tip around this, is to know your attachment style as much as possible. Know your fears, know your triggers. Ask your partner to learn their style really well and learn from each other. What are the triggers for each of you that are very different? What are the innate responses? Dig into that fear response and speak it out loud. It's not about, pointing fingers at each other. It's more about learning from each other, that knowing that you have different attachment styles. If your fear is about being abandoned, you need to share that with your partner. And then tell them how they can show up in a way that it can provide some reassurance. If you need to hear a partner, and then you need to hear what would reassure them. In this anxious avoidant loop, you'll both want different things. And that's the crazy thing. It's like two different pieces of a puzzle that kind of fit together sometimes, and then it blows up sometimes. And one of you is going to want closeness, and one of you is going to want space. And so those are opposite things. You have to understand yourself and understand your partner before trying to change things, because if not, then it feels really personal. We say things like, you don't want to do this for me, or you're rejecting me, instead of it being an understanding of really seeing what your partner's attachment style actually is. It's hard to change a pattern without digging into understanding first. It is literally impossible to change anything you don't understand about yourself and about your life. The question I always get is, how do, you get your needs met when you want opposite things? Okay. The answer, again, simple but not easy, is compromise. So it's my third technique, is to explore compromise when you're in a calm and peaceful place in a relationship. You cannot brainstorm together in the middle of a heated conflict. It is like the number one mistake that most people make. They're in the middle of something, they try to compromise and come up with ideas. And the reality is our brain is not online in the right way. We're just trying to get our needs met, and we want to feel connected, and it feels very panicky. So the compromise will look different for each couple. Okay. So there's not a one fit all, but I want to keep in mind that negotiating compromise is the agreement that the attachment response isn't personal. Okay. I'm going to say that again. In this compromising process, negotiating is based on the knowledge that the person's response to you, their attachment style, isn't personal. It isn't a rejection of you. It feels very personal because it feels like you're abandoning me, or you're running away, or you're smothering me. That's what it feels like. But it's actually not what's happening. What's happening is they're choosing what feels safe to them. If they're choosing to be avoidant, that's what feels safe to them. If there's an anxious response because you're trying to pull them closer, that's because you want to feel safe again. So everything is about safety. Compromise is about each person feeling safe to get their needs met. And it could be only sharing one feeling at a time and then stopping. So not talking for long periods of time. And then the avoidant partner listens and has the ability to have some space to process and come back to the conversation. There are very few topics for conflict that have to be resolved right here and there, that are right in the moment that need to be resolved. Most conversations can be negotiated over time. And we don't have to fall into the pressure of figuring it all out at once. So you can start slow in any conversation and keep the conversation actually going. None of this looks perfect. Okay. So out of these, 3 approaches, I want to tell you, none of it's actually perfect. And it's really, really messy. And even with all of my knowledge, all my education, all my experience, all the years I've been doing this, I also fall into old patterns of anxious attachment, where I anticipate abandonment and rejection, and I'll play an entire argument in my head, and I anticipate what my partner will say, and I'll have the millions of responses because I can imagine what he's going to say to me. So I need to be prepared for it. And I can feel myself getting worked up. I feel like the sensory responses in my body, that my blood pressure goes up. I can feel my heart rate. I'm kind of spinning a little bit. And this is all happening in my mind. And in some weird way, I know that it reassures me that I'm ready for this conflict for some reason. I'm ready for the fight. And I know this isn't healthy, and it doesn't happen all the time. And what it is for me, it's a sign that I'm feeling some fear or insecurity. And just because I know why I do it doesn't mean that I'm perfect at not doing it. I want you to remember that this isn't about perfection. And it's about really good communication. And my partner knows that I do this, and he doesn't take it personally. He knows that sometimes this happens, and it's a sign of fear for me and not a reflection of him or the relationship. It's my own attachment trigger that's happening, an old wound in my attachment that pulls me into this space. So I want you to know that this isn't about being perfect in any kind of way, that this is really, really messy, and that's okay. It's okay to get through it in a messy way, because you know what? Humans are just really freaking messy, and that's totally okay. So, Michelle, thank you so much for your question. I want you to know that this is going to resonate with so many people. And I think we can all lean into a little bit of a boring love mindset, that we can learn as much as possible about ourselves and others and compromise to get needs met. And really remembering that it isn't personal. Your partner's attachment style or your friend's attachment style or your boss's attachment style isn't really personal. It's part of who we are. And it's how we experience the world at a young age sometimes, or how we experience the world in a really difficult situation. So instead of feeling a lot of frustration and rejection, we can lean into some compassion and understanding. So the goal isn't to change each other at all. The goal is to understand each other and to truly see each other for the messy humans that we actually really are. And I think we can get to a place of compassion for the other person that you're in relationship with when you can understand what your attachment style is and what their attachment style is. So if you're looking for some really great books, I will put the links in the show notes, but I'll tell you that Dr. Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight, is brilliant. There's a workbook that comes with it, which is really amazing. It's really great for couples. If they want to work through things together, you can bring that into the therapy room if you've got a therapist, or work with it on your own. The other book I'd recommend, it's called Attached by Amir Levine and Rochelle Heller. Brilliant book on breaking down different attachment styles and how that shows up individually and in relationships. And again, you'll find the links in the show notes. I hope you found today's episode helpful and can integrate some tips into your relationships and into your life. If you think someone in your life would benefit from this podcast episode, I would love for you to share this episode with them, because I know that, attachment styles can be really difficult sometimes to navigate. Thank you for being part of this meaningful conversation today. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and follow button on your preferred platform. Your support fuels our growth and enables, us to reach more listeners just like you. This show wouldn't be possible without you. Take a quick look at our show notes again for convenient links on how to submit your question for a chance to be featured on our upcoming episodes. Thanks again for being part of the Mental Makeover community. Until next time, be bold, be brave, be well.